All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are recording this program. I know there was a library program also happening this evening. So hopefully folks who were interested in both can watch both recordings on their own time. So thank you for joining us tonight. We're excited to have Rachel Neurath with us for a program about planting in community. We do have everybody's mics muted, but the chat is open. Feel free to put questions in throughout Rachel's talk, and then at the end we'll have a chance. You can unmute and raise your hand and ask questions, and we can have a conversation too. So just before we get started, I wanted to share a few upcoming Lincoln Land Conservation Trust programs. Tomorrow there's a volunteer work day. So there's still time to sign up if you'd like to get out on the land, do some invasive species management. We have a noticing walk next week, which is a great way to take in the joys of nature. And then we have a couple Earth Day activities coming up. April 21st, Eyes on Owls, which is with NatureLink. April 22nd, a story time co-sponsored with the Lincoln Library. Our May and June birding walks are open, and I believe there's still space in some of them. And you can visit our website, lincolnconservation.org, and subscribe to our email newsletter to be the first to hear about upcoming events. Rachel's going to talk a lot about this during her presentation, but I just wanted to cover a few logistics. We're excited that we're once again offering a pollinator plant sale. The plant sale is going to be on May 18th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. It is open to the public. Anyone can swing by Lincoln Station and purchase plants. We'll have more than 20 species of perennials and shrubs available that support wild pollinators. We do have a special pricing for Land Trust members. So if you'd like to, you can join as a member at the sale and get that discount. And you can find our plant sale list, lincolnconservation.org/plant sale. And Rachel's going to talk a lot about the plants that we're offering and why we're offering them tonight. So with that, I want to just welcome Rachel. She is a PhD soil microbial ecologist and educator. She's also a Lincoln resident, and she's a trustee of the Land Trust and an active volunteer with Lincoln Common Ground. So she's very knowledgeable. It's great to have expertise right in our backyard. And thank you, Rachel, for preparing this presentation and joining us. So I'm going to stop my share and invite you to share your screen, and we'll get started.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the sharing. We did check it
Oh,
before
yeah.
everybody signed on.
Um, let's see. Should let you. Do have you as co-host. Um, hmm. Did you need to send me the file real quick? Yeah. All right. Sorry, everyone. Hold on a moment.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
I think I actually got it to work. I apologize
Great.
for that. I'm not sure why
I
it wasn't
see it.
first.
maybe just internet
Yeah.
connectivity. Yeah, there we go. Looks great.
Okay. Um, so I wanted to start by reading a land acknowledgement. So, we are gathered on the unceded lands of Massachusetts and Pawtucket peoples. We acknowledge that this land on which we live, work, and garden is ancestral land that has been inhabited and stewarded by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years before any settlers arrived. They continue to live and thrive on the land that was forcibly taken from countless leaders, communities, and elders. Let us honor the enslaved people who built the wealth and foundation of Lincoln and whose stories are just coming to light. As inhabitants and stewards of this landscape, we commit to sustaining and supporting the natural life and all living beings of this place. We commit to working towards healing and reconciliation amongst all people. We commit to learning more about the Indigenous peoples of this land and their history and to supporting Indigenous-led organizations. With immense love and gratitude for this place we call home, we will do our part in bringing about greater healing for all peoples, for all landscapes, for all beings, and for all future generations who will live here. So I wanted to start with a quote from one of my favorite authors and ecologists, Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. So it's all flourishing is mutual. Soil, fungus, tree, squirrel, boy, all are beneficiaries of reciprocity. And I bolded that word reciprocity because that's a word that is going to weave through everything I talk about tonight with plants and how important they are and what we can do when we plant together. So the guiding questions that I'm going to address tonight are, first, how can the concept of reciprocity help us understand the connection between plants, pollinators, and soil health? Then I'll be talking about what is the link between biodiversity and resilience in ecosystems? And then finally, why are interconnected communities more resilient? So first, thinking about reciprocity. So this is a picture of a food web, and it shows arrows weaving in and among all the different organisms in this deciduous forest food web. So this is a connected ecosystem. Ecosystems are full of different kinds of connections between organisms, and those organisms are interacting with each other, often in beneficial ways, sometimes not in beneficial ways, but they are interacting, and what one organism does impacts the other organisms in that ecosystem. And plants are so important. They are the base of our food web. And this is a food web that's drawn in a way that not only shows the different levels on the food web of who eats who, with the primary producers, which are the plants at the bottom, then the primary consumers who eat the plants, the secondary consumers who eat the primary consumers, then the tertiary consumers above and the quaternary consumers. But it's also showing how energy flows through that system. And so plants are so important because they are the base of that energy pyramid. They are where the energy comes from to make the sort of sugar-based, carbon-based biomass that every other organism in that food web relies on to live. So plants are really important. They are central to terrestrial ecosystems, and they may be key to enhancing climate mitigation and resilience. And this is a picture of showy goldenrod, which is not actually one of the plants in the plant sale, but all the other plants I talk about will be plants in the plant sale. So plants can photosynthesize, and this photosynthesis is critical. It takes light energy from the sun and it converts it to chemical energy. Plants consume carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they also take in water, and they produce oxygen for our atmosphere and sugars. And those sugars make up their stems, their roots, their flowers, every part of them. And then that's what all other organisms are relying on to eat. These plant-derived sugars are foundational to most life. And photosynthesis, looking way back at Earth history, began about 3.4 billion years ago. So for most of Earth's history, there has been photosynthesis. It was first cyanobacteria before it was land plants, and still cyanobacteria are important photosynthetic organisms. The emergence of photosynthesis changed Earth's atmosphere. So when you take water and carbon dioxide and sunlight as a plant and convert it to glucose and oxygen, you are drawing down carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen to the atmosphere. So if we look at Earth's ancient atmosphere, we see that when photosynthesis started, we started to see a major shift in the composition of Earth's atmosphere towards less carbon dioxide and more oxygen. And the composition of the atmosphere has been pretty steady for the past million years or so until recently. And so now we have rising CO2 levels because of fossil fuel emissions. It's the primary source. So we're changing our atmospheric composition. We know that this is a problem. We know that this is the primary driver of climate change. And plants, which were the first ones to change our atmosphere's composition in this really radical way, might still be a really important part of the solution as we think about what to do with this change in atmospheric CO2 that's driving climate change. So looking just really locally at climate change, Lincoln did a big survey with MAPC and came up with a climate action plan. And so this is from Lincoln's climate action plan. We know that Lincoln is going to expect not only higher temperatures, but also more large storm events, more annual precipitation, but not in a regular way. It's going to be less in the summer and fall, more in these spurts with potentially more frequent droughts in between. So not only do we have a changing climate with temperatures rising, but we have more storms, more irregularity, which is telling us that we're going to need to make our ecosystems even more resilient to handle that and think about plants and ecosystems that can withstand those radical changes with climate change. And one solution is plants, and then through plants, soil carbon storage. So plants can help store carbon in soil. The way that they do that is that they absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they make the sugars that are their backbone of their stems and leaves and roots. Those are carbon-rich sugars. And then the soil organisms in the soil feed on dead leaves, dead roots, and the plants release what are called soil exudates or root exudates into the soil. And those are sugar compounds, carbon compounds that the plant is putting into the soil to feed the microbes, because the microbes are in exchange giving the plant back a lot of benefits like nutrients, water, protection from pathogens. So it is this system of reciprocity, to use that word of reciprocity again, where the plant is feeding the microbes are feeding the plant, and in the process, carbon is getting stored, it's getting pulled out of the atmosphere, drawn into the plant, and then drawn into the soil. And carbon in the soil can sometimes stay there for thousands of years. So the soil is a really important carbon reservoir. Some of that carbon dioxide is released back to the air, but the goal is to get as much of it as possible into the soil. And so in the United States, we have some major sources of soil carbon storage. This is looking at the top 8 inches of soil in the United States. And we can see that forests, grasslands, agriculture, and wetlands all account for large carbon stores, particularly forests and agriculture. And there's this big question that a lot of scientists and researchers have right now of, could we increase that? Could we store even more carbon, drawing it out of the atmosphere, using plants to help us get it into the soil so that it's not in the atmosphere as much? And that's really important when we think about the global carbon cycle and global soil carbon storage. So this is looking at the carbon cycle sort of simplified on a global scale. Oceans are the biggest carbon reservoir. But then soil is actually a huge carbon reservoir. It's not as big as the ocean, but it's very big. It It's more than if you took all the carbon in the above ground biosphere, so trees and grass and plants above ground, plus all the carbon in the atmosphere and combined them. That's still less than the amount of carbon that's in soil. So soils already store carbon, but they have potential to more carbon. And since we are still emitting CO2, and there have been studies that show that even if we stopped emitting CO2 right now, we would still need a way to draw down some of that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to avoid some of the impacts of climate change. We really are looking for any opportunity to try to draw some of that CO2 out of the atmosphere and into the soil. So plants provide sort of this underground solution. They have this unseen power through their roots of taking carbon and storing it in the soil. And they are critical conduits for that carbon storage. And so we often think of what we see above ground, but this is the showy goldenrod. This is its root system and what's going on below ground. And the rhizosphere, which is a fancy word for the zone of root influence in soil, is a really fascinating spot. And there are a lot of important things that happen where the root meets the soil. So the roots can go pretty deep in the soil for some plants, and all along the root, you have a ton of microbial activity. So there tend to be lots and lots and lots of bacteria, fungi. This is what's called an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which is partly inside the root, and then it's extending out into the soil through fungal hyphae. And so the root is releasing these sugar, carbon-rich root exudates into the soil that's attracting a specific subset of the microbial community that looks distinct from the broader soil community. And it tends to have a lot of what are called plant beneficial microbes, microbes that help the plant grow better. So it's really good for the plant to have those there. They have a really symbiotic relationship where the plant is giving them food, they're giving the plant nutrients, like I was saying before, they help give the plant water, they help protect against pathogens. And so we have this reciprocity of the plant and the microbes both helping each other to thrive. There was a paper that just came out earlier this year, and it's called Soil Microbiome Interventions for Carbon Sequestration and Climate Mitigation. And in this paper, they identified 3 primary pathways for microbial, what they call interventions, which is they're thinking about ways that we can manage ecosystems and manage rhizospheres and manage soil microbial communities to help store more carbon and mitigate climate change. So the first way that they propose that this can happen is through stimulated plant growth. So we have here more carbon input. So when microbes are helping the plant grow stronger and grow better, the plant is going to have more what's called net primary productivity. It's going to be photosynthesizing more, making more carbon-based sugar molecules, growing bigger. And so a larger amount of carbon is going to go into the soil. So we have more carbon going from the plant, from the atmosphere, to the plant, to the soil. The second way is through soil organic matter transformations that lead to longer carbon storage in soil. So that's what we have down here, which is manage pathways to soil organic matter formation. So the way that carbon gets stored in soils, the way that it gets transformed from root litter, leaf litter, and those root exudates into soil carbon matters a lot. So some carbon is just going to get transformed right back to CO2 and go back to the atmosphere. But if we can do things that are going to help promote long-term, hundreds, thousands of year carbon storage in soil, having that long, what's called a residence time in the soil is going to help store that carbon and keep it out of the atmosphere for as long as possible. And a lot of recent research shows that having a healthy soil microbiome, having a diverse soil microbiome is really, really key to keeping that carbon in the soil for as long as possible. The third way that they recommend having a microbial intervention is by harnessing microbes to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from soil. So even though soils overall are a net carbon store, there is some CO2 that's released, sometimes methane, sometimes nitrous oxide. So if we have a healthier microbial community, then we tend to have fewer emissions of those greenhouse gases. So also thinking about that healthy microbial community to reduce carbon loss as a greenhouse gas. All of these really hinge on, so we looked at the very beginning at a deciduous forest food web. Now we're looking at this soil food web. So all of these hinge on having a healthy soil food web, having a diverse soil food web. If we have a lot of diversity of organisms in the soil, then we're much more likely to be able to store more carbon in the soil. And that's what the research over the past decade is showing again and again and again. And soil, we often think of it as just dirt, but there is so much going on in soil. If you take a teaspoon of a healthy soil, it has 1 billion bacteria, it has 1 million fungi in it, and really, really diverse populations. And then those lead to all these other organisms. So healthy soil is biodiverse, and plants help shape the below ground soil community. They are really, really important because they're feeding it. They're the one putting that carbon in. And so the composition of the plants, the health of the plants is all going to have an impact on what microbes and what soil organisms there are and how healthy they are. Plants help influence the soil, and then the soil community in turn influences plant health and growth. So again, we have this reciprocity. They're both shaping each other's health, growth, success. So again, to this idea of ecosystems, ecosystems are connected, and we have that happening below ground and we have that happening above ground. And one of the places that we think about a lot with above ground connected ecosystems and plants is with pollinators. And so this is a handout that I like from the National Park Service that says we need pollinators. Pollinators are responsible for 1 out of 3 bites of food we take each day. Pollinators need our help. Populations are declining worldwide due to habitat loss and pesticides, and potentially also climate change. Native plants support pollinators. So native plants and pollinators co-evolved. They evolved together. And so a lot of the pollinators that we have are really specific to the native plants that they evolved with, and they can't just pollinate any plant. So planting these native plants is really going to support the above ground pollinators. There isn't enough research right now, but I would expect that the more we learn about soil microbial communities, we might find similar trends where the below ground soil microbial community might also be co-evolved with the native plants and might be healthier with native plants. So I'm hoping there will be more research about that in the future. But for now, we do know that definitely pollinators do better when there's a native pollinator garden with pollinator plants that have co-evolved, just like all the amazing plants that LLCT is going to be offering in the plant sale. Another new study, which is less optimistic study that just came out this year in March, showed that there were rapid butterfly declines across the United States during the 21st century. So this was a huge review study looking at butterfly populations. And even though scientists knew that there were declines, the declines were even more pronounced than most of us had realized. So it's really, really critical that we intervene by planting these native plants. And Massachusetts has a really rich diversity of native insect pollinators. There are an estimated 380 species of bees and 120 species of butterflies. And 88% of the world's flowering plants require an insect pollinator for pollination. So again, we have this reciprocity of the pollinators and the plants working together, just like we talked about the microbes and in the soil being so key for the plants growing well. These plants absolutely rely on the pollinators. And so the pollinators are essential to keep our plants thriving, and then the plants are essential for the insects to have their host plants. So going back to our first guiding question, how can the concept of reciprocity help us understand the connection between plants, pollinators, and soil health? I'll go back to Robin Wall Kimmerer, all flourishing is mutual. So when we have a biodiverse, healthy population of native plants, then we promote biodiversity and soil health, and we promote pollinator health. And they're all helping each other, and they're giving back to each other, and they're working together in this interconnected ecosystem. Which brings us to the next question, which is, what is the link between biodiversity and resilience in ecosystems? And back again to this idea of plant power, where plants are central to terrestrial ecosystems and may be key to enhancing climate mitigation and resilience. Plants are also central to supporting at-risk pollinator populations. And biodiversity, again, is key to ecosystem resilience, especially in our changing climate. So I keep showing this picture of the showy goldenrod because I love showy goldenrod, but I love all these other native plants too. And these are all plants that are going to be available at the LLCT plant sale, among many others. And so we want to plant not just one plant, but a diversity of native plants. And when we have high biodiversity, then we have high ecosystem resilience. So this is a classic sort of ecosystem ecology way of modeling how resilient an ecosystem is. And so the idea is, it's called a ball and cup model. And the idea is that you have a ball, which is sort of the state that your ecosystem is in, and that there are natural fluctuations. There might be storm events, maybe a hurricane blows in and things are disrupted and there are perturbations, and the ball might swing back and forth and back and forth, but there's a bit of an equilibrium and it tends to go back here. But if there's some major disturbance, some huge disease, some huge storm, it might take this ball and it goes a little further till it reaches this tipping point. And then it's going to flow down into this new basin. And once it's in this new basin, it's not going to go back to the first basin. It's now in this new basin. So this is where you have an ecosystem that maybe used to be a forest, and then it went through this tipping point, and now maybe it is a grassland. It's a totally different ecosystem. It's never going to return to being quite where it was before. And so a resilient ecosystem is one in which it can handle a lot of perturbations without going over a tipping point and looking like a totally different ecosystem. And so this is the example of a low resilience ecosystem where we have a shallow cup and it doesn't take too much of a perturbation to change us so that it's in a totally different state. In contrast, a high resilience ecosystem, the basin is much deeper. And so we can handle here much greater perturbation before it goes up over the tipping point. And so that's the goal, is to have ecosystems with high resilience, where any ecosystem is going to go through some cycles, some perturbations. That always happens, even without climate change and habitat loss, but even more so now with climate change and habitat loss. So we need to do what we can to help increase the resilience of these ecosystems so that even when there are perturbations, they're not going to go cross that tipping point and down into a new basin and a new state. And so the key to doing this is higher biodiversity. The higher the biodiversity, the deeper this basin and the more resilient the ecosystem will be. And so we need to plant biodiversely. Biodiversity is key to ecosystem resilience, especially in our changing climate. Soil microbial diversity enhances soil carbon storage. Plant diversity is linked to soil microbial community diversity, and diverse plant communities can support diverse pollinator species. So one kind of diversity is temporal diversity. And I really love how all the staff at LLCT, when they selected plants for the plant sale that are early bloomers, middle bloomers, and late bloomers. So they're thinking about temporal diversity, planting diversely to extend the season for pollinators, so that you have pollinators who emerge earlier in the season and later in the season who are all going to find food sources, shelter that they need to survive and thrive. And so I wanted to highlight a couple of the plants that are going to be on sale for the plant sale. So we have, I really love wild blue indigo, which is especially cool, I think, from a sort of soil microbial ecology perspective, because it is a nitrogen fixing plant. It has rhizobium microbes in its roots that can help fix nitrogen and add to the nitrogen in the soil. There's pussy willow, which is a shrub, golden alexanders, and woodland phlox. Then moving into midsummer blooms, high bush blueberry, foxglove beard tongue, wild bergamot, and butterfly weed. And these are just a selection. There are even more than these. I'm just showing 4 from each time period. And then in the late summer, button blazing star, blue vervain, button bush, which is another shrub, and the blueberry on the last one was a shrub, and showy goldenrod is not actually one of them, but it's one that I was just going to show since I was talking about it before, and it supports a lot of pollinators. So we have the temporal diversity. The other way we can have diversity is planting diversely to support a wide variety of pollinators. And that's something that these plants really do. So looking at these early blooms, the wild blue indigo is going to support, these are just some of the pollinators, a nice broad array of different insects. And then we have an example from the midsummer blooms with the wild bergamot and some of the pollinators that it supports. And then the late summer blooms, an example with the showy goldenrod and some of the pollinators that are supported by showy goldenrod. So we have a bunch of different pollinators, and each of these, again, has way more. So if you look at all the plants, they're all supporting this huge variety of and diversity of pollinators. So the third way to think about planting for diversity is root diversity. So planting diversely to support a wide variety of root depths and root architectures. Root architectures is the term that people who study this kind of thing often use. It really means like, what's the shape of the root? Is it like a long, deep taproot? Is it a more fibrous root with lots of little offshoots? What does that shape look like? And the shape matters and the depth matters for a couple of reasons. One is that the deeper the roots go, the deeper the carbon can get stored from that plant. So there's been some research that shows that it's really important to have deeply rooted plants that are going to store carbon really deep. Another reason is that deeper rooted plants can access deeper water sources. So if there are more droughts, then those deeper water sources are still accessible, even if the surface soil has dried out. And then having all this root architecture and variety of root architecture means that if you have different types of plants with different types of root architecture growing next to each other, you might be filling in a lot of that negative space in the soil so that a large amount of the soil is now rhizosphere soil, which is soil in the zone of root influence, which is soil that is getting the carbon inputs from the plants. And it's soil that has these thriving microbial communities that are being fed by the plants. And it also, when you have the roots growing in the soil and you have a lot of microbial activity in the soil, then those roots tend to enhance soil structure, which means that the soil can better hold on to water, which again helps in droughts. It can usually better also drain off water and filter water if there's too much rain during a flood. It also tends to be better at holding nutrients, storing nutrients. The microbes help release the nutrients for the plants. And again, carbon storage is a really key aspect too. So looking at some of the diversity of root depth and form, this is the blue vervain, the butterfly weed, the foxglove beard tongue, and the golden alexander. And we can see that each has a different depth. These 3 are pretty similar, but a little different, and a different root architecture. So we have the really stark kind of taproot of the butterfly weed versus more fibrous roots in the rest. They all look a little different from each other. And you can imagine that if they're growing together in community, they're going to be interacting with the soil in different complementary ways. And then I love that LLCT is offering shrubs too. So these shrubs have really deep roots. You can see this button bush, which is a small button bush. This is just a 2-foot button bush, has foot deep roots, and those are just going to get deeper. And the roots are pretty deep on the pussy willow too. Some of the plants also, like the indigo, the wild blue indigo, can get really deep roots. So the shrubs, again, give us more diversity of root depth and form. So looking again at these plants that we were thinking about, the wild blue indigo, this is the wild blue indigo's root system. So a deep taproot. This is the wild bergamot's root system, the showy goldenrod's root system. So we have temporal diversity, pollinator diversity, and root diversity. And then the other thing we have is microbial diversity. When we plant diverse plants, we select for diverse microbial communities. Different plants release different carbon compounds, and those are going to each select for a different microbial community. So we have a more diverse soil microbial community, and generally a healthier soil microbial community. And so we can think about, and again, we need more research, but we can imagine that now we also have this rhizosphere microbe community associated with each of these root systems. So when we plant plants, we're not just planting the plant, we are helping support the pollinators, we're helping support healthy soil, and we're helping support healthy soil microbes. And then the final piece of the equation is that this biodiversity doesn't just help the plants and the pollinators and the microbes, it helps us too. Biodiversity is key for healthy human communities. We're part of the ecosystem. And there's been a lot of research showing that higher biodiversity means we have more food and water security. It means we have better health outcomes. It means that we have mitigated the effects of climate change, which is going to help us. So we are part of this ecosystem, and we benefit when we have healthy, resilient, interconnected ecosystems. So what is the link between biodiversity and resilience in ecosystems? Biodiversity increases resilience, and in our changing climate, this is particularly essential. And for the final guiding question, how do we create resilient communities? So we know it's important. We know we need to do it. How do we do it? And I'm going to return again to Robin Wall Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. So we are part of this reciprocity. There's reciprocity between the plants and the microbes and the soil and the pollinators, but there's also a reciprocity between us and our ecosystems. So we're going to think about now interconnected communities. And this old concept of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so this is an image of the classic three sisters, corn, bean, and squash. And we can see not only are they supporting each other above ground with the classic example of the squash providing shade and helping keep the soil moist, the beans growing up the stalk of the corn and providing nitrogen to the soil, and the corn providing the structure for the beans to grow on. But you can see these intermingled root systems, each with their own root architecture. And you can imagine that underground, they're each supporting a distinct, diverse microbial community that all together is working to store carbon, to provide nutrients, to help the plants grow better. And so we have this interconnected, reciprocal ecosystem. And so again, with us, with humans, we can be interconnected communities. And back to the Lincoln Climate Action Plan, there is a lot of focus on increasing community resilience. So when we work together to help mitigate climate change, and when we work together to plant native plants, we can become a more resilient community. So the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about planting tips. And I really believe, and I've just like every year feel this more strongly, that plants are really the place that we can make a huge difference. They are the base of the food web. They are our source of carbon for all living life. They're really amazing, and they're sort of the thing that we can change. It's hard to directly change a soil microbial community. It's hard to support a pollinator without a plant. But by planting these native plants, we can do all of that. We can plant the plants, and we can then be supporting healthy soil, storing carbon, helping support pollinators. It's beautiful, and it's something that is relatively easy to do in any space that we have. So in whatever space you have access to, you can diversify that space by adding native plants. And this is Diana Rice Shahan's just beautiful backyard full of native pollinators, native pollinator plants. So my next planting tip is when you plant, think about increasing biodiversity. So pollinators thrive in connected habitats. And the more we plant as a community, the more we can help. So habitat loss is one of the big drivers of the declines that we're seeing in butterfly populations, other insect populations. So if we as a community in Lincoln all commit to planting native plants and our yards start to connect and our public spaces start to connect, that really helps a lot more. If we just have these small isolated islands of native plants, it's harder for the pollinators to go between these islands, and then it's just grass and there's not a lot for them, unless it's native grass, and then that can be really beneficial too. But these pollinator plants, if more and more of us are growing them, and we start to have these large swaths that the pollinators can shift to back and forth, then we have these connected habitats that are going to really, really promote sort of the health of the entire ecosystem, but especially for the pollinators. So my next tip when you're ready to start planting is to get to know the area you're planting in. I think probably most of you are familiar with this, but it's important when you're selecting plants to think about, okay, where am I planting? What is the light like there? Is it shady? Is it sunny, partially sunny? What's the soil type? What's going to grow well in that soil? What's the moisture like? What other plants are growing there? How are they going to work together? And how do I want to use this space? So thinking about also creating a space that you'll be able to use and enjoy, or that others will be able to use and enjoy. I really love, this is from the Wild Seed Project, this book on native ground covers, and it talks about planting in guilds. Guilds are plants that tend to coexist together in natural ecosystems, and they're plants that really work well together and support each other. They might have complementary nutrient needs. They probably don't shade each other out when they're growing together. So they're going to grow in a way that's really beneficial together. And so this book, and there are other resources too, give examples of plants that will grow really well together for different types of environments. So this has bare and naked slopes between a rock and a hard place. They have all kinds of examples in this book. And to build biodiversity, this is from this book, Native Ground Covers, and I love this quote: to build biodiversity is helpful to think in 3 dimensions. Native ground covers lay a literal foundation for a larger, vibrant system in which plants work together, like in a forest. So we have ground covers, and then we have a little bit taller plants, and then thinking about shrubs, and then thinking about trees. So we have this 3-dimensional system of plants working together, working in reciprocity, and then interacting in reciprocity with the soil below and the pollinators and other organisms in that ecosystem above. All right, the next planting tip that I have is to minimize soil disturbance. So we spent a lot of time talking about the soil microbial community, how important that soil microbial community is. Talked a little bit about soil structure and how it's really important to have soil structure. Soil forms what are called aggregates, which are like clumps of soil, and those are really important for storing carbon. They're really important for storing water and good aeration and water flow and general soil health. So if you have soil that already has great structure, you don't want to just dig it all up and ruin it. And you definitely don't want to pour chemicals onto it, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So there's a great method that I think a lot of people in town have been using called sheet mulching. Diana Rice Shahan, again, has been doing some great workshops on that in the past. And so you're laying down levels of organic material like mulch and cardboard, grass clippings, leaves, compost, and just building up on the soil. So that will decompose and become another layer of soil, and you can plant directly into that. It will help suppress the weeds, and you don't need chemicals, and you don't need to dig into the soil. So as much as you can, minimize digging and do the sheet mulching method to have as little soil disturbance as possible. And then this is really important: avoid pesticides and synthetic fertilizer. This is an article from a couple of years ago from Scientific American. Pesticides are killing the organisms that keep our soils healthy. And so this spray here is supposed to be the pesticide, and this jar is protecting this one small region of soil and plants. And we can see there's a lot more diversity here. And this is obviously an illustration, but I think it's a beautiful illustration. And it really shows that pesticides, they're harmful for our health. They're harmful for above ground plant life. They're really, really harmful for pollinator species, and they're also really harmful for below ground soil communities. So we don't need to use pesticides. And actually, when we plant in biodiverse systems, the plants are going to be attracting things like maybe predatory wasps that will help keep pests at bay. When you have a more biodiverse ecosystem, you don't have as many issues with disease. You don't have as many issues with pests because you have this system that's working together better. And it tends to be in the less diverse systems that you have more issues with disease and pests. So we really want to avoid pesticides. And also with these native plants, we really don't need synthetic fertilizer. We can use compost if we need to use compost. A lot of these plants can thrive in relatively low nutrient conditions. And sometimes they'll actually grow deeper root systems if there aren't too many nutrients. So kind of just sticking to organic material, sticking to mulch, sticking to compost, and avoiding synthetic chemical fertilizers. And native plants, they take a little bit of care to get established, but then once they're established, they don't need that much care. And so I really like this diagram that's comparing non-native plants to native plants, and you can see the difference in the root systems. And the root systems for all of these native plants are just so much deeper than the non-natives. They go really, really deep. And so once those root systems are established, the plants are really good at getting the water they need. They're really good at getting the nutrients they need, and they don't need very much care. So it's actually much easier to have native plants once you've gone through the initial first year or so of getting them established. And then my final tip is if you can plant in community. So there's a lot of work that's been done on the sort of mental health benefits of planting together, gardening together. And it's something that I know for me has brought a lot of joy. And so we can all work together to do the work of planting these plants, giving to each other in reciprocity, giving to the ecosystems in reciprocity to help create these resilient ecosystems. So how do we create resilient communities? By working together to create diverse and connected ecosystems. And that is all that I have. So I would love to take any questions that anyone has. Oops, sorry.
Wow, thank you, Rachel. That was really wonderful. I think I'm just thinking of your talks that you've given in the last few years and how this is really built on that. And I love how you went into that root architecture. I hadn't thought about it that way, that they're kind of creating that three-dimensional space underneath the ground. So a couple of questions coming in, and folks feel free to put questions in the chat. And I will also, let's see, change the permissions. So if folks want to raise their hand, they can. So just quickly, a question from Greta. She's referencing a diagram you had early on about units of carbon in the top 8 inches of soil. Is that gigatons?
It's usually in gigatons. Let me see if I can. In this one, it's in gigatons. In this one, it should say, yeah, soil carbon estimates are for the contiguous US. 1 gigaton equals 1 billion metric tons. Yeah,
Okay,
so
great.
gigatons. Yeah, gigatons. That's there. Yeah.
Great. A question from Robin. Could you just clarify perturbation from your ball and cup model?
Yeah. So a perturbation is something that's disturbing the ecosystem. So that could be like a disease, an invasive species. It could be a weather-related event like a tornado or a hurricane or a big flood.
Okay, great. Do you have any examples of like when ecosystems have reached that tipping point from like the past recent history, just so we have an example of like
See if I
how an
can find.
ecosystem like actually reaches that point? Because it seems strange that if all other factors are the same, that it doesn't eventually go back to kind of that previous state. And then Robin, you'll be next in line for the next question.
According to Google, I'm looking, coral reefs are an example with ocean acidification, but I'll see if I can find, I've definitely seen other examples. Let me see if I can find some other But here's oops, I'll see if I can pull this up with the screen share in a second.
And just to respond to Greta, yes, I think it was gigatons per acre.
Mhm. So this is an example from coral reefs. So once it crosses this tipping point without like major interventions, it's not going to go back to this nice coral reef. We've gone over the threshold and now it's this much less diverse without coral reef ocean ecosystem. But this happens in terrestrial ecosystems too. I'll see if I can find an example of that.
I guess like the maybe like initial formation of deserts might be, be that.
Yes, I think that that is a good example.
Okay, Robin.
Oh, I never encountered this word perbitation. I don't know what it is or how to spell it. I'm just curious as a word. Rachel, by the way, it was terrific talk. Thank you so much. It was excellent. I love lots of concepts that I really enjoyed hearing about.
Thank you.
How do you spell perbitation?
Rachel has put it in the chat. So it's like if you're perturbed by
perturbation.
something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've never seen that word before.
I have another question, Rachel. So it's clear that there's this symbiotic relationship between the plants and the microorganisms. Have people done studies where they can see that there's actually a greater microbial diversity in areas where there are healthy plant communities versus soil that doesn't have plant communities?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, they have. And they've done studies on things like organic versus synthetic agriculture. And they've done studies with like more diverse plant communities versus like more monoculture communities. And yeah, it's hard to study still soil microbial communities because they're so diverse and there's so much going on. And there still are questions of what's the best way to study them. Is it just identifying which microbes are there, or is it looking at their sort of like functions in the ecosystem? But yeah, there's been a lot of research that definitely shows that there's a really important plant connection and that more diverse plants are key to a more diverse soil microbial community.
Great. Question from Andy, a hard question from Andy. So say you have a large area, he's talking 4 acre field. How would you recommend, restoring a biodiverse plant population without digging up a whole field or sheet mulching a whole field?
Yeah. There are other people on this call too who might want to join in and have a comment. But I think that was something when I moved into my house in Lincoln, it was like all grassy yard and we wanted to convert it. And it's a lot of grass. And we've been like slowly doing the sheet mulching in some areas. And then we have Diana Rice Shahan has been helping us with, we've been experimenting with just not mowing areas and just planting a couple plugs here and there within those areas and pulling out anything that's like really problematic. So we're sort of being permissive of some non-natives, but if there are any more detrimental non-natives, we pull those out. Any invasive species, we'll pull those out. And that's been working pretty well we have 2 acres and we're like slowly working on it, but it's definitely harder. Like if you watch the videos or read the stuff from a lot of the like lawn to meadow experts, especially the older stuff, they're like, oh, just put like glyphosate all over it. And they claim that that's okay like the first time because you just do a one-time application and then you can plant everything the way you want. But I just really don't like
There's some
pesticides, thinking about the
long-term
soil microbes and
effects of
everything.
that.
Yeah, so it's not my preference. Or some people say it's okay to till like that one time and then you're going to plant all these plants. I think you can go through like arguments different ways, like that might still be better than it being grass forever. But yeah, you can see like we've also had more luck in our sunnier parts of our yard doing the like just let it grow. Like we've actually been surprised how much awesome stuff has come up, like tons of black-eyed Susans and we've had a lot of luck just sprinkling in. Diana Rice Shahan taught me this. She calls it like the scritchel method. Like in areas that are a little sparser anyway, I'll take sometimes a rake and just scratch at it a little bit. So it's just the soil surface. There's not any deep disturbance. And then I'll just sprinkle in seeds like bluegrass or sorry, blue stem, little blue stem and coneflower and black-eyed Susans have all grown really well in those areas.
Yeah, it probably works well for some hardy plants that can
Yeah.
hold their own. So that's interesting. It's more of a slow transformation that you're working on, little bit by bit.
Yeah.
That's
But
great.
again, this is also like this idea of planting in community. Like I know LLCT, you have like the Chapman pasture,
Mhm.
right? And people work together, and then you've been able to do this really large area.
Yeah, but as you said, we've taken a small area and planted it a little more intensively, and then the rest, as you said, is kind of sprinkled in with some other species. So there's opportunity for more questions, and folks can also raise their hand and ask questions too. From Margaret, so for a first time pollinator garden, would you recommend starting with like a broad selection, but just one plant, or groups of 2 to 3, but fewer species?
That's a great question. I don't have like a definitive answer, but I remember, and feel free to come on and comment, but I learned from Robin Wilkerson that pollinators do like kind of bigger swaths of plants. I think it's hard for them sometimes if it's a single plant to find that single plant. So if it's a small area that you're starting with, maybe just start with like, you could do 2 species or something and have like kind of a clump of one and a clump of another species that kind of work well together and won't compete with each other. And then if you decide to expand it, you could think about a little bit more diversity then. But I do think thinking about just like the behavior and needs of the pollinators, it actually does help to have a couple plants of the same type next to each other.
Yeah, I think that's right. They like a bigger area is going to attract them. They're going to see it. So if you can only plant a couple species, you can look back at Rachel's diagrams and, maybe pick one from each part of the season so that you have something blooming early summer, midsummer, late summer. So that would be like 3 species.
And I picked those plants kind of randomly. Like they were ones I could find good root pictures of was a lot of it. So all the LLCT plants are wonderful. So any of those would be whatever you like and works well in your soil and your light conditions. It's great.
Let's see, did I miss any questions? See, just a comment from Jillian, that laying down tarps and cardboard and then doing some native seeds can be a great way to just do it like small section by small section. That's great. Last call for questions. We are coming up on 8:30 here, so we'll wait another moment and then I think we can call it an evening. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. This was really wonderful. And I think we're all fired up now for the spring planting. I do want to mention again, LLCT's plant sale is May 18th. There is also Middlesex Conservation District is having a plant sale. I think it's pre-orders only, and then they have pickup at Farrington Nature Link. So you can find that information at Middlesex Conservation District. And the Lincoln Garden Club is also offering their biennial plant sale this year, and that is on May 10th, I believe. Also in Lincoln, one day only, no pre-orders, come and shop for plants. So lots of opportunities to buy native plants this spring and really boost some pollinator supporting gardens. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Rachel, and have a great evening.